Good evening. These are admittedly strange times. Our lives are not what they once were. Today, some of you spent hours homeschooling your children, while some of you spent hours haggling with the government for unemployment relief. Some of you stress-baked sourdough, while some of you didn't have bread to eat. Some of you stealth Googled marital separation during quarantine, while some of you swiped right on Tinder and then swiped right again and then swiped right again and again and again and again, because that is how you have sex now. Me, I've been researching whether sideburns grow back ever since my wife gave me a haircut in our bathroom.
I mean, is this going to be like a new thing?
Also, don't have to talk about my relationship issues because...
I am your relationship issues.
Right.
You can still talk about them. I'd love to hear.
And I've been thinking about how to launch a TV news show during a crisis without precedent. And what better way to launch it than with my guests today, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, who's going to talk about the future of the progressive movement, the comedian Seth MacFarlane, who's going to open up, I hope, about his private conversations and dealings with the Murdochs and Fox News, and Taylor Mack playing some music for us. But first, I just want to say to all of you, welcome. Take a seat at the table. That's what this new show is called, Seat at the Table. Because when we started dreaming up this program only a few months ago, back when social distancing was just my personal experience of middle school, we were so oblivious to what loomed on the horizon that we named the show after a highly irresponsible act now, gathering with strangers around a table. Back then, in the days of handshakes and dinners with friends and daily underwear changes, the world felt like it was shifting and demanding new scrutiny. A populist movement questioning free market dogma was on the rise. Xenophobic nationalism was on the rise. Keanu Reeves was on the rise in a phenomenon known as the Keanu-sance. Back then, it seemed like we needed a show where we could process these changes, where we could talk and actually listen above the din of everyone yelling in a 9-way split screen with Don Lemon, where people who don't typically have a seat at the table could sit down and speak up and say all the things they couldn't normally say. A show where we could question and challenge power. Now, though, the world that was changing appears to be collapsing. The virus is ravaging the nation. March and April saw what might possibly be the highest unemployment rates since the Great Depression. Britney Spears is Instagramming writers calling for Marxist revolution. Now the very idea of power itself, who has it, and how they wield it, is no longer a matter of intellectual debate. It's a matter of life and death. For people on the margins of society, it always has been. What we're seeing, in fact, is not a new America. What we're seeing is an America exposed for what it was. Every element of this unfolding crisis is a product of the collective choices we have made in the past. Gutting the social safety net, denying workers a living wage, warehousing people in overcrowded prisons, defunding pandemic prevention while spending billions fighting an imaginary war in space. Or is it on space? War on space? Only Mike Pence knows for sure. If we missed these things before, now with our roads empty, our skies clear, our supply chain short on ventilators, and our store shelves stripped of all-purpose flour, the essential separated from the non-essential, now we can see them clearly. We can see the hard realities we've been too self-interested or apathetic or bamboozled to see. A recent New York Times op-ed put it starkly. If inequality had frozen at 1980s levels, hadn't been allowed to yawn ever wider, the bottom 90% of American households, 90%, would each see $12,000 a year more in income. In other words, most of you watching this, except the billionaires, are effectively sending the billionaires $1,000 a month. Except you're not sending it, it's being taken from you via policy. In New York City, Central Park and the Javits Center are being converted into field hospitals. Meanwhile, in recent years, around 20 of the city's struggling hospitals, indoor hospitals, were shut down instead of being bailed out. Many of them turned into housing, despite concerns by lawmakers and activists that closing them would compromise the health needs of the lower income communities they served. Some, like St. Vincent's, were transformed into luxury condos for the rich. Isn't that nice? Selling for as much as $19 million. Which is why, even as this show's title suggests an activity that is presently hazardous, we remain as committed as ever to its original vision and purpose. We do need to talk, not just about the news per se, not about what happened in the last 24 hours, but about the root causes we haven't been talking about, things about ourselves, about our society that have been hidden for far too long. And something I want to discuss with you on tonight's show and in the weeks to come is this. What will the legacy of this crisis be? What will we make of the massive upheaval we're currently experiencing? Who will we be on the other side? This is not a new question. As The Atlantic reminds us, it's a question that goes back at least as far as the French Revolution, when the righteous anger of rioting French peasants of 1789 mutated into a brutal reign of terror. Or, more recently, as noted by Rahm Emanuel in the wake of the 2008 financial crash, you never want a serious crisis to go to waste.
I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic, I'm hopeful.
Whereupon that crisis was immediately allowed to go to waste. Incredibly, barely a decade later, we are living that moment again. The scramble has already begun, Rebecca Solnit wrote recently in the New York Times. The possibilities for change, for the better or the worse, for a more egalitarian or more authoritarian society, burst out of the gate like racehorses at times like these. It's easy to be cynical about who will prevail in this contest, given the advantages of those with entrenched power, and given what we've witnessed time and time again. Because in that scramble to fix a broken system, chaos reigns, time is short, legislation is rushed through, and in the smoke of the raging fire, it's often the arsonists who rush in to be the firefighters, costume and everything. I see you, debt financiers in Puerto Rico. I see you, charter school advocates in New Orleans. As Naomi Klein warned in her book, The Shock Doctrine, crises can be a boom time for corrupt politicians and big corporations. If we don't stay focused on designing real solutions in a time like this, if we don't make that our work, lobbyists are more than happy to relieve us of the task. You may have heard that big business in France has wanted for years to get rid of that country's 35-hour work week, a cornerstone of its labor law, not to be confused with America's 35-hour work day. Well, guess when they finally got it done? After the virus struck. Closer to home, the Trump administration appears to have used the chaos of the coronavirus outbreak to relax environmental regulations indefinitely, a boon for polluters and a realization of its long-standing deregulation agenda, and a perfect solution to a pandemic. But crises can also go the other way. Throughout history, disasters, natural and man-made, have served to topple entrenched power, to bring about the end of decadent Gilded Ages, to give rise to eras of reform. We do not always respond to shocks with regression, Naomi Klein writes. Sometimes, in the face of crisis, we grow up fast. The cataclysm of the Civil War produced the Reconstruction Amendments, laying the groundwork for true democracy in America for the first time. The exploitation of child and immigrant labor in the Gilded Age led to the Fair Labor Standards Act and other protections of FDR's New Deal. The riots that engulfed our cities in the wake of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination led to the passage of the Fair Housing Act and the adoption of widespread affirmative action policies in colleges and the workplace. We can do this right when we try. In fact, I would say, especially to the young people watching, that in addition to being a time of tragedy and pain and the shattering of stability, we may also soon be living in the greatest moment of political possibility you will know in your lifetimes. The important questions for me, for you, and for this show are why and how. That is what we're going to seek to set out to answer together, week after week. Why did one crisis go that way, served to entrench power, while the other went the other way, helping to erode it? How do we not only chase away the plague, but also leave in its wake a more just and equitable distribution of power? How do we solve the crisis not superficially, but at the root? Not for some, but for all. Especially at a time like this, when the traditional power-building tools of organizing and door-knocking are impossible. Historically, Arundhati Roy writes in the Financial Times, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, she writes. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. Right now, things may seem dark and hopeless. As I speak to you, mass graves are being dug in New York City to handle an overflow of bodies. In less than 2 months, more than 40,000 Americans have died. To put it in perspective, that's the number of people who died in 9/11, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, the Johnstown flood, 3 of the country's deadliest hurricanes, Pearl Harbor, and the ranks of U.S. soldiers in the Iraq War combined. Depending on how we act today, we could still lose tens, even hundreds of thousands more. Perhaps you've lost someone you love, or you've just spent a harrowing 2 weeks in the ICU yourself. Or maybe you're one of the lucky ones. And your biggest problem right now is knowing more than you ever hoped to about big cat possession in Oklahoma. That, and needing to get back to the office so you can resume spending more time with your work husband than your quarantine husband, aka your husband. Either way, the good news is that this crisis has exposed more than a country with gaping holes in its medical supply chains and its social safety net. It has also exposed the tremendous courage, decency, and resilience of everyday people, many of whom, just 6 weeks ago, our society did not even deem essential. Every day we see UPS drivers risking their lives to make sure we get our sweet, sweet toilet paper on time. I hope mine arrives soon. Every day we see neighbors risking their lives to bring an elderly stranger a bag of groceries. Every day we see nurses risking their lives, MacGyvering trash bags into hazmat suits. And if we can harness that, if we can take that energy and that civic spirit and find out how to channel it and how to sustain it, then we, as citizens, will decide what lies on the other side of that door. We did not choose this crisis. Who would? But we can try to shape its consequences. We can interrogate power. We can work to change other people's minds and be open to changing our own. We, on this show, can ask more probing questions and listen more deeply for answers. We can make you think and perhaps, even in a time like this, make you laugh. And we can equip you with the truths you need to do the one job from which you can never be laid off, that of citizen. That is what this show will do. So welcome, one and all, to a seat at the table.